Okay, hello, my friends. It is Wednesday, February 12th, 2025, and here's the daily brief. My name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide context in the war in Ukraine. So, 1,150 Russians off the battlefield day over day. That's pretty low, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. 9 tanks, 27 armored fighting vehicles, 53 artillery systems. We see another air defense system, and 121 Russian vehicles and fuel tanks. Now, when I was looking at this, I actually had to look at a date just to make sure, because yesterday was something very similar to that, like 120 something. And I was like, oh, did I get this wrong? No, that's correct. Okay, 1150 Russians off the battlefield, though. And so when we look at that, 1150 is pretty low. Average for the month is 1272. That's also pretty low. So we see that. And then I said to myself, okay, so that means the attacks in Bakros are probably like in the low 30s. And sure enough, there we are. Bakros direction, Ukrainian defenders stopped all 30 Russian assaults. It's almost like if you look at what's going on in Bakros, you can say, okay, the casualties are probably about this, or vice versa. So, well, I'm just going to kind of think through that each day and try to gauge where things are. Okay, Ukrainian Air Force reported on a combined missile and drone attack last night. 111 of 123 Shahed drones were shot down or suppressed by electronic warfare. And this says 6 out of 6 Iskander ballistic missiles, but it looks like there was a seventh. Rescue efforts are ongoing in Kyiv this morning after Russians poured 7 ballistic missiles and over 120 drones onto the people of Ukraine. Excuse me. In Kyiv, there are dead, wounded, including a child of 9 years old. UATV, the channel UATV, done some interviews on, was hit as well. Well, not hit directly, but like the building was hit in the process, or the neighborhood, and you see shattered glass and things like that. Footage of the aftermath of the Russian strike. UATV channel was damaged as a result of the night strike on Kyiv. Ukrainian air defense shot down 6 ballistic missiles, one of which was intended for the office of the Ukrainian television broadcaster. Well, if it wasn't intended, it came really, really close. Dozens of windows were knocked out of the building, production facilities and cars were damaged. Despite the attack, Ukrainian foreign broadcasting continues its work. But yeah, it did some damage, no doubt. Look at that. Okay. Russian strike destroyed humanitarian warehouse where pet food was for homeless Ukrainian animals was stored. It's called the Happy Paw Foundation. The strike took place at night, so no one was injured. Thousands of animals will be without food in the upcoming month, Happy Paw wrote. Meanwhile, Medvedev commented on today's strike, calling it peace through strength. Sometimes this concept really works, he wrote on his Telegram channel. Destroying pet food shows the true face of Russia. Yep. Okay, so that's what was happening last night. President Zelensky calls for increased pressure to stop Russian tea after Russian 4 a.m. deadly ballistic strike on Ukraine's capital. This Russian tea will not stop by itself. Putin is not preparing for peace. It sure doesn't look like he's preparing for peace. Now, I want you to watch this. This is a first days of the war, the first 90 days, and it's a 108-second video infographic that just shows where the attacks were, where the missile strikes were. And if you look at it, you're struck by the concept that they weren't really surgically they were trying to overwhelm the system. They weren't like what's the word? It's not condensed. It's like you have to focus your energy in one place and strike. You have to mass. Mass is the term I'm looking for. You have to mass and just really go. But they were just trying to strike all over the place and grab as much as they could. And then they kind of got pushed back, right? And yeah, so that's what was happening here. But you can see where all the strikes are. It's pretty wild to see all the attacks, all the missile strikes, those sort of things. And there goes the Moskva and the Black Sea, right? So, wow, how about that? Okay, so I just thought that would help put things in context. Russian refugees from Kursk find shelter in Ukraine. These are Russian citizens finding shelter in Ukraine. Listen to that. Over 100 Russian civilians, including severely wounded, were evacuated to Ukraine following a strike on a bomb shelter in Sutsa. Many are elderly, leaving Russia with minimal belongings. The evacuation took place at night via treacherous routes to avoid detection by Russian drones. How about that? Ukrainian authorities and Red Cross assisted in transporting them to hospitals and temporary shelters. This marks the largest evacuation of Russians since the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the Kursk region. Now, Russian civilians who have spent 6 months under Ukrainian occupation are now struggling to reconcile the Kremlin's official narrative with their own reality. Quote, "We love our country and our president," Mikhail said at the start of the interview, noting that he and his two friends had voted for Putin. Quote, "Even with what has happened to us, we love our country and we're never going to betray it," unquote. Okay, so they're, but it's the Ukrainians that are taking care of you, not the Russians trying to get you out free from the Ukrainians' persecution. Okay, so meanwhile, what are the Russians doing? Because they have to re-up their lost casualties over time, right? FSB and OMON raid on communal housing in, I can't pronounce that city, to collect cannon fodder for the invasion of Ukraine. Now, I know that this is a raid. I don't know that these guys are necessarily going to go to the front lines, but this is basically what it's like when this happens, and this has happened many times before. So even if this particular instance isn't doing that, that's kind of what happens in other places. Okay, here's another video of Russian soldiers on crutches being sent to assault in the Donetsk direction. Really, like that's happening. One guy was crawling because he couldn't really, yeah, I mean, and this is what they'll do. They'll put these guys right back on the line. Now, Russia could launch a full-scale invasion of Poland and Lithuania, says Zelensky. I don't know that that's going to happen, but listen to his reasoning. He noted that the Russian forces are set to hold joint exercises with Belarus, just as they did before the invading Ukraine in 2022. And I get that. I don't think they have the forces in order to do that. I'll show you what the amount of forces are between Ukraine and Russia in just a little bit, but I think they're tied up. They would have to forfeit large areas of Ukraine if they were to do that at this point. But they are building toward that end. They're on a war footing right now within the country. Now, when President Zelensky explains that Russians intend to occupy all of Europe, it's not hyperbolic or rhetoric. Ukraine's 110 combat brigades are currently holding back Russia's 220 combat brigades, which will expand to 250 this year, from Europe's 82 combat brigades. All of Europe has 82 combat brigades. That's how woefully unprepared Europe is for war. They've been living off the peace dividend for way too long, and they need to get serious. Today, an army of 110 brigades is holding back those who have 220 to 230. But that's 1 to 2, Zelensky added. The president said that while Russia's numerical advantage compared to Ukraine is 2 to 1, in comparison to Europe, now think about this. So let's say a scenario where Ukraine is forced to have peace. They have to now reduce their military and be neutral. And now they're essentially out of the game. And you have, to Europe, it's 3 to 1, 220 to 230 now, and it's going to expand to 250. And there's 82 combat brigades in Europe. And if Ukraine is neutralized by treaty out of the fight, how about that? That's a perspective that you ought to have about what the reality is and why you ought to be backing Ukraine even now. This Senator Roger Wicker, he's a Republican from Mississippi or Missouri. Yeah, Mississippi. Vladimir Putin intends to rebuild the Soviet Union, and he uses the most brutal forms of tea to accomplish his mission. Let's hear what he has to say.
Vladimir Putin intends to return to as much of the old Soviet Union dictatorship as he possibly can. I hope this war ends. And frankly, I've hoped for 3 years under the Biden administration that administration would provide the freedom fighters inside their own country to have the necessary equipment, the necessary ammunition, the necessary permission to defeat this illegal invasion. But I simply at this point want to alert anyone who's listening, alert my colleagues, anyone who is listening to the sound of my voice in any way, to the reality of the utter cruelty, the unspeakable conditions that Russia uses in violation of every international law. If Vladimir Putin comes to the negotiating table and agrees to a ceasefire, we need to bear in mind that he is the gentleman who has countenanced this outrage that I've barely been able to speak about today. And any negotiations we have with the Russians and with the current leadership needs to be done in light of the facts as outlined in this independent.
Okay, so good for him. He's standing up and explaining it. All right. Patriarch Kirill ridiculed a priest who said that the church should think about the kingdom of God, not patriotism. How about that? Well, I mean, that is what the church is supposed to do, right? The church is supposed to be pointing you toward God, and that's like their primary function. The priest says, I do not agree with such patriotic tendency in the church relations. Now, let's stop there. I go to church and I'm patriotic, but you have to also think in terms of the context. So you should be in line with both the church teaching, like assuming that you're in the church, with the church teachings about, who is God and love your neighbor and things along those lines. And you can be patriotic if the country is doing the right thing. If the country is doing the wrong thing, you should say that's the wrong thing based on here's what the scripture says, and that thou shalt nots and the absolutes and right, love your neighbor and that sort of thing. Okay. The duty of a priest is to lead people to the kingdom of heaven, he says, not to engage in patriotism. But of course, that's not what Kirill thinks his job is, because his job is to work for Putin. Quote, he says, how great. It's the first time I've heard such a thing. Are you a bishop? Not from Western Ukraine by any chance? Go and sit down and seriously think about all that you've just said here. Okay, I'm not making that up. This is Kirill talking, rebuking him. Yeah. I mean, so Kirill's rebuking him here. Wow. How about that? Okay. Now, I told you yesterday, we have to show ugly side of things too. It's not just, you can't just cherry pick. You have to show the whole picture. And I even gave this example of when you find corruption, you have to show that, they found corruption. Here's an example. So the suspect is Dmytro Koyura, as SBU officer for 20 plus years. He had access to top secret data and wide context. He worked in the SBU Academy, handling personnel files and future leadership. Appointed in 2016 to ATO headquarters, he gathered intel across departments. Well, what just happened to him? Ukraine's SBU has exposed a top FSB mole within its ranks. The collaborator, head of the Anti-Terrorism Center, great place for him to be, was personally arrested this morning by SBU Chief Vasily Malyuk. The SBU documented 14 cases of his illegal activity, even using his position to feed Russia intelligence. So bad things, but we have to show bad things are happening. Okay, Ukraine's population. Now this is both bad and good simultaneously, and I'll show you why it's bad, and then I'll show you why it could be good later on. Ukraine's population has dropped to 32 million. That's bad, right? Deputy PM Oleksiy Chernyshov has said, as of late 2024, 32 million people lived in Ukraine, down from 42 million a decade ago. The Ukrainian nation totals 60 million, but half reside abroad as migrants, refugees, or diaspora. Okay, now, diaspora. Sorry, I mispronounced that. So it's bad. I mean, 32 million to stand up to 144 million. By the way, yesterday I said 144,000 with Russia when I was showing the map. It's 144 million. Number you pointed that out in the comments. I read your comments. Okay, so it's bad that you're so outmatched right now. On the other side of this, however, as this diaspora returns to Ukraine, they're going to come back with all these ideas from whichever countries they were residing in, and it's going to help them build such a robust economy on the other side. It's going to be wonderful, but we have to get to the other side first. Okay, here, this is interesting. Russian forces tried a new tactic in drones. The reconnaissance drone attempted a suicide ram against the Ukrainian strike UAV from Wings of Omega Special Forces. It backfired. The Ukrainian drone withstood the impact, kept flying while the Russian UAV crashed. This unusual aerial duel showed how drone warfare keeps evolving. I keep telling you that. It keeps evolving, with each side testing new combat methods. Each downed recon drone means one less spotter for Russia's long-range weapon. So there it is. There's the impact, and it didn't work. The Ukrainian drone stayed up, and that reconnaissance drone is no longer with us. Now, this is just those evolving tactics, is like naval evolving tactics, right? Shooting bows and arrows at them and then going, And like I'm talking like thousands of years ago, and they're going, you know what? If we ram the other ship, what happens? Well, it turns out that worked. And so that became a tactic over time. Okay, look at this date, February 12th, 2022. This is from the parody site, Russian Embassy, SWE. Examples of the large-scale disinformation campaign by Western media hyping this claim that Russia is planning to invade Ukraine. Yeah, this is the Russian Embassy. Okay, sorry, I think I said parody site. It's actually a Russian Embassy, SWE, Sweden, like official whatever. And they're giving these examples of Western news talking about an invasion, and they're calling it up in the upper right-hand corner, fake. February 12th, 2022. How about that? And then last, I'll leave you with this from Darth Putin. 2022, Russia will not invade Ukraine. 2025, they're talking about Russia will not invade Poland. Like, that's where we are. All right, my friends, that's all that I have for you today. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.